Chapter 1. The Silent Terror. Introduction to the Night Witches. At 8 p.m. on a cold autumn night in 1941, somewhere on the front lines of the Soviet Union, a small, almost invisible aircraft glides through the sky, its engine cut off, the only sound the wind rushing by its wings. For a moment, it's nothing more than a shadow against the backdrop of the stars. Then, without warning, bombs fall. Silent, deadly, and precise. Below, German soldiers scramble in panic. They never heard it coming. This was the reality for the German Luftwaffe, and these stealthy attackers were known as the Night Witches. A terrifying group of Soviet pilots, mostly women, flying outdated, fragile biplanes, yet making the skies over the Eastern Front their own. The Germans had no idea how to fight them. The German soldiers on the ground could only hear the faint rumble of the wind. And then, suddenly, explosions. That silence, it became their worst nightmare. The Germans called them witches because of the eerily quiet sound of their attacks. But to the Night Witches, this silence was their weapon. The Night Witches were the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, a group of women who became a symbol of courage and defiance. But how did these women manage to terrorize the most powerful air force in the world with little more than outdated planes? The answer lay not in the firepower of their machines, but in their ability to move unnoticed, a tactic so deadly that it changed the course of the war for the Luftwaffe. And for these women, flying their obsolete aircraft, it would become their greatest strength. Chapter 2. The Technique. Silent night, bombing and glide attacks. To understand the Night Witches, you first need to understand their method. Their planes, the Polikarpov Po-2, were laughably outdated. When the Soviets first deployed them, the planes were meant for agriculture, not combat. But they had something far more important: stealth. And the Night Witches knew how to use it. At night, with the engine off, the Po-2 would glide through the darkness with no sound, making it impossible for German forces to hear them coming. The typical bomber, even one as slow as the Po-2, would be detected long before it got close to its target. But not the Night Witches. They flew their biplanes at night with their engines off, quietly gliding across enemy lines to drop their bombs. Imagine it, a silent attack. No loud engines, no warning, just sudden destruction. The Germans didn't know it was coming until the bombs hit the ground, often too late to do anything about it. The technique was simple but deadly. Climb to a certain altitude, cut the engine, glide silently over the enemy's defenses, and drop bombs on their targets, whether it was a military position, a supply depot, or even enemy aircraft. And then, once the bombs were dropped, the pilot would quickly restart the engine and escape into the night. While the Po-2 might not have been the most powerful weapon in the sky, it was certainly the quietest. And that quiet became the Night Witches' greatest weapon. Chapter 3. Why the Luftwaffe feared the Night Witches. Imagine you're a German pilot, freshly trained, confident in your abilities. You've flown countless missions during the day, always with the upper hand. But now, your squadron is being ordered to fly at night. The thought makes you uneasy. The darkness isn't something you're used to. There's no visibility, no clear targets. It's unnerving. But what's worse, you've heard the rumors, the ones about the silent planes, the ones with no engines roaring through the sky. You've heard the stories of your fellow pilots who went up against these Night Witches, only to return with nothing but fear in their eyes. They never heard them coming. By the time they knew what was happening, it was too late. The Luftwaffe, an air force that had been dominant in Europe, began to refuse night missions. They couldn't handle it. The Night Witches had found a way to exploit a weakness in the German forces. And this wasn't just about the bombings. This was about fear. For the German pilots, The fear of the unknown was worse than any fight they had ever encountered. They couldn't predict where or when the next attack would happen. No engine noise, no warning. It wasn't just about being outmaneuvered. It was about the psychological effect. The fear that gripped the Luftwaffe pilots every time they were ordered into the skies at night, knowing that the witches might strike at any moment, and they wouldn't even hear them coming. The fear was so intense that at one point, German pilots began refusing to fly at night, choosing instead to leave the skies to these Soviet women. And as the fear spread, the night witches continued to strike, virtually unchecked. Chapter 4. The Women Behind the Witches. Behind the terrifying raids was a group of women who had defied every expectation. These were not women looking for fame or glory. They were civilians, teachers, doctors, students, and engineers who had volunteered for a dangerous mission. The Soviet Union, in desperate need of every available soldier, had found a way to utilize these women not just as support, but as fighters. One of the most famous figures among the Night Witches was Marina Raskova, their commander. Marina Raskova was a legendary aviator, known for her daring exploits in the skies. She would go on to lead the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, molding these young women into an elite fighting force that would strike fear into the hearts of the Germans. These women were trained not just to fly, but to survive in the most brutal conditions imaginable. Many had no formal flying experience before the war began, but through rigorous training, they became masters of their craft, flying their outdated biplanes with incredible precision and courage. And their bravery wasn't limited to the skies. Many of these pilots lived through the most difficult conditions, constantly facing the dangers of war while battling sexism and prejudice within their own military. But despite all of this, the Night Witches fought on, proving time and again that they were more than just their gender. They were warriors. Chapter 5. Legacy. The Untold Story of the Night Witches. The legacy of the Night Witches didn't end with the war. The courage and determination they showed during World War II are still remembered today, though their story has remained largely hidden for decades. For years, they were overshadowed by their male counterparts. The men in the Soviet military were often the focus of wartime propaganda, while the women of the Night Witches were all but forgotten. Yet, their impact was undeniable. They helped shift the balance of power during the war, making night bombing an important and feared tactic that would change the way future wars were fought. By the end of the war, they had flown over 30,000 missions, dropped over 23,000 tons of bombs, and achieved a remarkable level of precision bombing that was virtually unmatched. The true impact of their actions was realized long after the war ended. Though they received little recognition at the time, the Night Witches have now come to be seen as icons of both bravery and ingenuity, proof that even in the darkest of times, women can lead, innovate, and change the world. Their legacy is now cemented in history, but it's important to remember that these women, with no formal military training, no modern equipment, and only their sheer will to survive, turned the tide against one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The Night Witches were not just a symbol of strength, they were a reminder that the most unexpected heroes can change the course of history. In silence, they flew over enemy lines, silently dropping their bombs and proving that fear could be the most powerful weapon of all.